Could you tell our listeners about how you became interested in the sport of boxing as a youngster?
Well, now, Chris, we're going back a long time. You know, I lived on the north end of Hartford when I was a kid. And, of course, you know, 11, 12, 13, I was getting scraps all the time. I was fighting, but I never wanted to fight. Every time I'd go home, my father would say to me, Willie, don't come home crying. He said, you settle your business out of the outside. And it was a rough neighborhood. And then, naturally, you begin fighting and this and that. All of a sudden, one day, a fellow said to me, Willie, I see you fighting with these kids every day. He says, why don't you go to the gymnasium? He says, you know, you learn how to fight, you even get paid. So I was 15 years old. I went to the gym and had my first amateur fight. I think I got $3 for my first fight, which was a lot of money for me, and I was on my way. That's where I started. And boxing as an amateur, I did very, very well. I had 65 amateur fights. I think I lost 3 of them at the time, which was pretty good for me. You know, I didn't think I could fight. I became a professional, and again, I was on my way.
Okay. You had an illustrious amateur career in which you were the Connecticut State Flyweight and Bantamweight champion, and you only had 2 defeats. 3 defeats.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, 3 defeats.
While in the amateurs. One of them was to Walker Smith, who we better know as Sugar Ray Robinson.
Right. Great.
You want to comment on how it was like to fight him?
I'll comment, Chris. You know, I was fighting as an amateur, and I had a manager. As an amateur, I had a manager. He was perhaps the bravest manager that ever lived. We went to Norwich, Connecticut one night. I got on a scale. I weighed 105 pounds. I was flyweight champ. So this tall black kid gets on a scale, 126. They said, that's the guy you're fighting. I said, listen. I said, I only weigh 105 pounds. This guy weighs a lot more. And he said, Willie, he said, if he was any good, he wouldn't be fighting you. So naturally, I boxed the guy. He chased me for 3 rounds, and he won the decision. He boxed the name of Ray Roberts. It was Ray Robertson. We became good friends after the fight, and I got to know Ray pretty well. But he was a great champion, great amateur champion, a great professional champion. But what am I doing in the ring with this guy? He was a dynamite fella, you know. And at the time, he had a few pounds on me. Even up, I don't know if I could lick. But anyways, he won the fight, and again, I finally got rid of that guy. Finally.
It took you 54 consecutive victories to get a title shot against Chalky Wright. In boxing today, a fighter might get a chance at the title after a dozen bouts. How do you feel about this?
Well, you know, I had perhaps the smartest manager that ever lived. His name was Lou Viscusi from Tampa, Florida, and my trainer was a fella called Bill Gore, who was in Miami at the time, but he was out of Providence, Rhode Island originally. Bill was perhaps the greatest trainer for me that ever lived. He knew my style. He knew what I could do, and I had a manager who was one of the smartest men that ever lived. He made me win 62 fights in a row before I got beat. And then I won 73 in a row. This is clever managing. And I owe an awful lot of my success. Of course, I got lucky. I won a few fights. But my manager was the bravest, the brilliantest manager that ever lived to do that with me. Thank you.
But you did it inside the ring, so you have to take some credit there.
I had to do, but without
Come
that,
on.
it would have been tough.
On November 20th, 1942, you won the World Featherweight Championship against Chalky Wright.
Right.
Could you recall that night for our listeners?
Well, you know, I was 20 years old at the time. I was 20 in September, and now it's 2 months later. I'm fighting for the championship of the world. What am I doing in the ring with a great fighter like Chalky Wright? But I had won 53 fights in a row, and I was ready for him. And that night, I was at I wouldn't say I was at my best, but I was very, very quick. I had to be quick with a guy like Chalky who could knock you out with one punch. So I outdistanced him. I sped him in 15 rounds and won the decision. It was a great night for me.
You went on to win 8 more fights to extend your incredible winning streak to 63 in a row. On March 19th, 1943, you suffered your very first defeat as a professional to the undefeated former lightweight champion, Sammy Agat. Do you remember how you felt after your first loss?
Well, let me tell you, Chris, he wasn't undefeated. He had been beaten before. He was lightweight champ, but he had lost a few fights. I was undefeated, so naturally he won a decision on me. But this is not an easy fight, but I thought I won the fight because I won 10 rounds with Sammy. And I don't know, I didn't get hurt. I did very well, and I thought I won the fight, but at the end of 10 rounds, they gave him the decision, and that was it. But I didn't get hurt, and I never boxed Sammy again because he had been there a long time anyway. He was a great, rough, and tough sort of a guy. So I guess he muscled me, more or less. But I thought I beat him. I thought I won every fight I lost.
After the Angot fight, you went on to another incredible streak of 73 bouts without a loss. No one before or after you has been able to put together 2 winning streaks such as you did. How were you able to win 109 of your first 111 fights? That just doesn't happen.
Well, again, you know, my manager, this guy was perhaps the greatest manager that ever lived. He put me in with opponents that was my style, and that I had a chance to beat. And I had a good trainer. I was always in shape, Chris, because that was something my trainer insisted. If I didn't train, I didn't fight. So naturally, I wanted to make a little money, so I worked out pretty hard. I was always in shape. And again, the manager had a lot to do with it. Smart man.
On January 8th, 1947, you experienced a very frightening occurrence. Tell us about the plane crash in which you suffered near-fatal injuries.
Well, I was in Miami at the time, and my manager had spoken to me on the phone. He said, Willie, we got to fight in 3 weeks. You got to come up and start training. So I got on a non-scheduled airline, and flying up, the weather was pretty bad, but we got to New Jersey, and they were supposed to land in Newark, New Jersey, and he kept circling and circling, and finally he went down. We cracked up in Middleville, New Jersey. I woke up, I had a broken back and a broken leg. And they brought me to a hospital, and 2 days later they brought me to the Hartford Hospital in Hartford, where they put a cast on my chest, a cast on my leg, and it was doubtful if I ever fight again. So I got very, very, good Lord took care of me. I took off the cast in 6 months. I went in the gym, I started training right away, and I began boxing again. And you know, I had the best of care, the best doctors. And I was suing for a lot of money, but they saw me fight. This guy's fighting better than ever. I never got a dime. So I'm glad I went back and boxed. I wouldn't have been able to box if I laid off a couple of years, you know, for the money. I wanted to fight, and I did fight. And again, I had the best of care, but I didn't get a dime.
That leads me to my next question. After the injury, do you think you were ever the same fighter again?
I don't want to say I wasn't, but I did very well after the fight. That's the trouble. I couldn't sue because I got hurt in January. I took off the cast in June. I defended my title the same year in September with a fella called Jock Leslie up there in Flint, Michigan. And good Lord took care of me. I stopped him in 11 rounds. So this guy's just fighting better than ever. You know, the accident didn't hurt me at all, but it did because every once in a while when the weather's bad, my back hurts, or you know, but there's nothing serious. So I got no kicks.
That's good to hear. Many have written that your finest hour was on February 11th, 1949, when you regained your title in Madison Square Garden. Do you think this was your greatest performance?
Well, it had to be, as far as boxing is concerned, I got all banged up. It wasn't my finest hour. I had my eyes were both cut. You know, he was a tough son of a gun, and he could fight. Sandy was a great fighter. Let's face it, you know, and it had to be one of my great moments. But I like the idea of winning that round without throwing a punch. That I think was one of my great moments.
Let's get to that.
Whenever you're ready.
In a fight against Jackie Graves, you actually won a round without ever throwing.
Well, you know, that I'm very proud of, Chris, because I told a newspaper man that night. He came to me and interviewed me, and he kept telling me about Jackie Graves, how great he was. He said, you know, if he hit you, I said, Jackie was a southpaw besides, and nobody fought southpaws back 20 years ago. I said, listen, I said, Don Riley was all right. I said, let's have some fun. The third round of this fight, I'm not going to throw a punch. See how I make out. He said, Willie, you'll never do it. Anyway, fight night, Don Riley was at ringside doing the fight on radio. And the first 2 rounds, I boxed Jackie, and things went all right. I guess, in the second round, when I sat down, he was right down the ringside, and he said, this is the round. He pointed at me. I said to myself, I'll try it, but if things get tough, I'll hit this guy. But sure enough, I went out there, and I began boxing and weaving, and Jackie kept missing and missing and missing, so I went the whole round without throwing a punch and won the round. I kept the 3 judges from his hometown. And they gave me the round. What fight were they watching? Of course it's amazing. He don't throw a punch. But he fell down a couple of times. He went through the ropes a couple of times. And, you know, he looked awkward at being missing like that. So the 3 judges, officials, gave me the round, which is great.
Unreal.
And I was on my way, you know, and I'm very proud of that.
Getting back to Sandy Sadler, what do you think made him your toughest opponent? What was in his style that made him so tough for you?
Well, you know, I boxed a lot of guys Sandy's style. I boxed Abe Dunner, who was tall and thin like Sandy, and I had beaten him. I think I was too overconfident. I didn't take him too lightly, but this guy, you had to take him lightly, highly, because he could fight. I didn't know. Of course, after the first fight, I knew he could fight. I think the first fight at the time I boxed him, again, you know, I was boxing with this kid Ciara in the gym, and he'd say to me, Willie, oh, you win. I could handle him pretty good in the gym, but Sandy was a tough guy, and he could fight, and he beat me. That's all there's to it. I took him too lightly, but after the first fight, I didn't take him lightly anymore. It was kind of late because he had, he was a tough son of a gun.
After the Sadler fights, you went on to win 60 of 66 bouts between 1951 and 1959, between the ages of 30 and 37. Most fighters were out of their prime at that time. How were you able to continue at such a high level?
Well, again, I was always in pretty good shape. And then, again, the manager was a great manager, the trainer was a great trainer. And I was, being in shape, I fought once, twice a month. I boxed 3 times in 1 week once, professionally. But the only reason they let me box is because I won the fights. I boxed a Monday, Wednesday, and a Saturday, out of town, 3 times. It's amazing. I boxed twice a week, many times, Chris. And of course, 4 times a month, many times too, once a week. But at that time, you could fight that way. But now I think you can't fight more than once every 2 weeks. What if they got different rules? But they let me get by because I was winning and I wasn't getting hurt.
You were elected into boxing's Hall of Fame in 1963, yet you made a comeback in 1965 at the age of 44, in which you beat 9 out of 10 opponents who were half of your age. What was your motivation to come back at that advanced age?
Well, motivation. Things are I wasn't working, and I knew I could fight a little bit, and I had a manager then who didn't give me any tough fights. He gave me just ordinary opponents like myself, so I was able to handle them. But any good fighter would probably have licked me at that time. But again, when you're winning and you're making a few bucks, you're not getting hurt, and that's what happened to me. I wasn't getting hurt, but the last fight I had, I think I boxed champion of the world, Hogan Bassey, a dynamite puncher in Boston, and he TKO'd me, and I knew I couldn't fight anymore, but I was making money, and that's why I kept going. And I wasn't getting hurt. That was the general idea of it. I followed one model in my boxing career, one model, I really did. He who hits and runs away lives to fight another day.